Hi, I'm Miles Cheetham, and today I want to share an idea with you that's taken about 5 years to fully form. It started with open banking back in 2016, where I led the customer and proposition team for 4 years. And it's really matured over the last year, working with my colleagues on a project called Open Energy. The possibilities of data, to me at least, are like one of those tunes that gets stuck in your head, an earworm. And I've been lucky enough to work with some fabulous and free-thinking people at Open Banking and Open Energy. And I'm going to fill you in on the work that we've done. So, as I said, it started for me at Open Banking, which was a pretty anonymous office in London, close to Tower Bridge and the Tower of London. It's nice to see those places, but the motivation for me was that we could really create something transformational in open banking. And we did. Today, there are something like 3 million users of open banking. And these are people using third-party services that draw directly from your bank data and allow you securely and with your consent to budget, prove affordability for a loan or a mortgage or a bond if you prefer, to forecast your cash flow if you're a small business, to draw down a percentage of your earnings early if the month is longer than your salary, sweep away money for a rainy day, pay directly from your account, and so on. It's really become a very fast-growing global phenomenon, and it's happening worldwide. It really promises to usher in a new era of fintechs, and in the UK, there are already some 350 companies live, and something like the same amount again that are either in the process of getting regulatory authorization or are in the sandbox. And so we thought, why can't we do the same kind of thing in the energy sector? So energy is going through a massive structural change. You may have heard me talk something of this last year, and I've actually been looking very hard at this and working to develop solutions that will allow data sharing across the energy sector. And in 12 months, the team have made some massive strides. So these structural changes in the energy industry, it's really decentralizing very quickly. It's really decarbonizing very quickly. And it's moving to a world in which, instead of huge great big power stations supplying the energy we use in our homes and businesses, a lot of that energy is being created at the edge. So this is the solar PV panels that sit on your roof. It's the heat pumps which are now being installed in homes and businesses. It's electric vehicles, and something like 20% of all vehicles registered at the moment in the UK in a month are now electric. And it's all changing. There's going to be no more gas boilers. There's no more petrol and diesel cars. And it's going to be a huge transformational shift for us. So this is something which is going to have a massive impact on the environment, but also on the economy. And we saw really that there was a huge amount of potential, both for industrial scale data, that's the substations and transmission networks and the like, right down to personal data at household level and vehicle level. And when you're dealing with data which is personal, then you've got to be really careful about data privacy, of course. That's strictly covered by GDPR, data protection, data privacy regulation. But of course, the industrial data very often can actually fall under what's called critical national infrastructure. So security is equally a very high consideration when you're dealing with this kind of data sharing. And we looked at this in the context of an Innovate UK competition. So Innovate UK is a government body that stimulates new ideas, awards prizes and grant funding for new ideas that could be revolutionary and help British industry and help some of the problems we face, not just in the UK, but also around the world. And we were able to, therefore, with the aid of Innovate UK, create and analyze a hypothesis, looking at what would map over from the data sharing system we built for open banking and how that would look for the energy sector. We looked at it from the point of view of the user and market needs. What would we need to satisfy in order to make this attractive and usable to the marketplace? The policy that we'd have to put in place, what might that mean? The regulatory requirements that this would all require. the operational requirements, and of course, we needed to look at the technical feasibility behind all of this. And by and large, it all mapped. We were able to see what the type of amendments would be that we'd have to make to policy and participant management. We could see the hierarchical structures that we'd have to put in place there between the different types of energy data sharing. But we saw that actually the underlying architecture was a really good fit and technically required very little modification. So much so that we could actually see pretty quickly that interoperability between fintech companies and energy tech companies in the future will be very straightforward if everybody adopts the same approach. And we could see some really interesting use cases already when we started thinking about that we believe will start to get traction in the next few years. So with this grant funding and trying to really show that this could be brought to life, we built an alpha prototype. We built that at the back end of last year. It looked very much like it was going to work. And actually, we persuaded the competition judges that this was the way to go. And they awarded us the funding to build a beta. And we did that earlier in the year. We onboarded real users using real data and providing participant management, discoverability, a search engine basically for data, and showed that you could manage participant access to real data and therefore enable some really interesting services which would help us to achieve these goals of decentralization and decarbonization. And along the way, we were pretty pleased that actually we outthought some of the big brand names, and that's always very satisfying and something that I think these type of competitions really help. So now Open Energy is in pilot, and we expect that this regulation will really start to get traction over the next year or so. We've built this very much as an open standard. We've done this from the perspective of understanding the use cases first and getting a really good understanding of the commercials that sat around that. In particular, we were looking at a local authority use case, and we could see that local authorities, particularly when they're faced with difficult choices and having to retrofit a community with low carbon technologies, need to be able to show to the local energy system operator that they can maintain the balance on the energy system. In other words, you're not going to overload it as you start to bring in heat pumps and electric vehicle charge points. That's not going to cause a failure on the energy system. And it's very important to get that kind of thing right. So there's a really clear use case and very clear commercial use case sitting behind this. And the interesting thing we discovered is because we knew how this all worked and because largely the path had been trodden before, it can be done at a fraction of the cost of open banking. Because simply we learned so much when we built open banking. There we were having to pathfind, build it all from scratch. Here, we could literally take what we'd done before and work out how to repurpose it in order to serve the needs of the energy market. And therefore, open energy is going to be an order of magnitude cheaper if it's applied in the way that we've developed it here. And it will be the key to unlock data. It will be the way in which we can balance and manage energy production and consumption at a national, at a local, and a household level. And we think that this could be a huge driver for value. We think that it will open up huge opportunities, not just for incumbents, but for new energy tech companies, and at the same time to really hasten decentralization and decarbonization across the energy sector. So this has the twin benefits of being an economic driver, creating really valuable new companies using this type of data to solve the type of problem that I've just outlined for local authorities, and to be a driver for decarbonization so that we can get to low carbon technologies faster and therefore have much less impact on the environment. And then with my colleagues at Icebreaker One, where we were working on this, we said, well, what else is possible? And when you start thinking about what you can do with data, you really start to realize the wealth of use cases and problems that you can solve. And because we're interested in influencing government policy and trying to really shape thinking, we started by looking at the UK government's, that's Boris Johnson's 10-point plan for a green economy as being our start point. And this is really about planning for a green industrial revolution, which the government estimates here will create something like 250,000 new jobs in the UK. And what we saw that was by taking these applications of data, yes, we could drive through some really interesting developments for the energy sector, but also we could start to see where there were really strong use cases across a wide range of other sectors. We saw that the applications for smart data through which consumers and small businesses particularly get access to their own and product related data through a third party, the rollout of that 10-point green economy plan could be very successful and could help an extremely varied and cut through a wide range of sectors of the economy. And that would be true across the globe. And we saw that the policies that were needed to enable and promote the wider use of data, for example, by enabling easier discoverability, easier search and finding data sets in the first instance, and then providing access to those data sets on a broad basis, could provide some very, very significant benefits. So I'll explain. We looked at something like 40 use cases over a 6-week sprint, and we wanted to see what we could learn by skimming through these. These were really identified to illustrate the key issues that we would face across the sectors, the types of solutions that we could achieve, and to allow consideration for the implications on government and regulatory policy. That was the driver behind our thinking. We thought, well, what can we do and how can we take this out to the policymakers and get them to really think about what needs to happen? For this piece of work, we weren't really trying to drive in the detail. We weren't asking specifically how this would be enacted. We were just trying to capture the key use cases. And we were doing that really so that we could capture and identify the commonalities, the interdependencies, the preconditions that must exist to allow us to use data to solve some of these critical problems that we've identified. Our analysis included, of course, a scoring exercise. We were trying to weight some of these things and try to understand which of the use cases we were looking at could be further evaluated because they had high impact and relatively low complexity to implement. And top of the list, we saw as smart energy households. This is basically using data to manage the energy consumption in a home really efficiently. So for example, when you charge your electric vehicle up, your car, then you could store that energy in the battery. And actually, if you're not using your car, you don't plan to, then you could release that energy, which you've drawn down from the system overnight at low peak rates. And then you could release it back into your home during a high consumption period when actually you're being charged more for that very same energy. So you can do things like that. It helps to balance the energy network. It helps to save money for individual consumers. And so we can see that those kind of cost savings could be really interesting commercial drivers. And this would be something that we think would probably be in place relatively soon. It doesn't need anything more than an extension of what's basically existing technology. We saw a massive amount of potential in analysis for the supply chain for manufacturers and retailers and so on. Really trying to understand the carbon footprint of the goods that we consume all the way through the supply chain, literally from when they're extracted from the ground as raw materials through to being consumed in your home. What would that actually mean? And we can see that there are pockets of good news there. There is quite a lot of data available, but often it's held in different ways, in different formats. It's not always easy to get. For a manufacturer or a retailer, they may well need to enter into a contractual agreement in order to be able to access that data. That means that they may have multiple bilateral agreements that they have to go through in order to be able to access the data across the chain. And then it's not all standardized. It may come in different formats. And these are all areas that would, of course, need to be standardized, not least to have a kind of common approach to access it and a common legal sharing agreement around all of this, but all perfectly possible if we have a mind to do it. Other areas we identified were building data. So how does a building perform? This is really important because actually, if you're going to hit net zero in 2050, you need to understand what your building stock and your housing stock is going to do. 80% of that is still going to be used daily in 2050. The things that exist today will need to be really energy efficient, not just now, but also in the future. And we need to understand exactly how a building will perform. And so therefore, data can be very helpful in doing that. I mentioned about local authorities retrofitting a community and needing to understand the impact on the local energy system. What does that mean for the local substation? If they're going to introduce low carbon technologies, how would you plan for that? There may not be sufficient headroom at the substation to allow you to equip everybody with electric vehicle charge points, because simply if everybody charged their vehicle at the same time, what would that do for the spare capacity at the local substation? The answer is it could probably breach it pretty quickly. And therefore, you need to be able to plan around these scenarios, and the energy system cannot be built out in the way we need without access to the right kind of data. And this is going to be a major theme, making sure that the grid can be balanced at a local level and a national level in order to get to the type of energy system we require for the future. And we saw lots of other things as well. We saw things like understanding water risks, and managing the quality and traceability of food, the use of herbicides and pesticides, rewilding, and so on. There are many use cases that we could see. Within a relatively short period of time, we'd identified all of these things. And we felt, well, actually, there's something in this. You get the picture. There are quite a few things, and these are just a few of them. And then you can ally to that something which is happening over in the financial sector and in corporate land. Businesses are now being required increasingly to report on their environmental impact, their carbon footprint. A couple of things that kind of highlight this. There's a thing called the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, often referred to as TCFD. This is about ensuring that companies report on their environmental impact in their annual reports. And of course, in order to be able to do that, you need data. That's not always, as I mentioned, all that easy to acquire. And therefore, there's an implication within that there needs to be more standardization. It needs to be easier to find, easier to share, and so on. And likewise, the European Union's drive towards corporate sustainability reporting. These are things which I think have huge momentum already, and that will continue to be a major theme for corporates. And I believe that they will be increasingly required to provide more and more detail about the type of impact that they have as a business, and make sure that that's adequately accounted for in their reporting. Which leads me then to, well, how do you actually get the change that you're looking for? How does data actually allow us to do what we want it to do? So here's the change theory. Data, of course, can lead to better decisions. It can inform the kind of decision-making that will change corporate and customer behavior, and ultimately can be used to guide flows of capital so that they're applied in the right way. Today, for example, financial markets factor in market and credit risk on a large scale. That's commonplace. It's not yet the case that this is done for climate risk, and yet it's increasingly seen as introducing the type of systemic risk that can precipitate a financial crisis. We see the evidence every year: heat waves, droughts, excess rain, flooding. There are so many things happening across the world. You can see the pattern. And this is really important for financial services, for insurers in particular. And of course, climate risk can be priced in to the same extent as market and credit risk if the data is available. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be standardized. And really what we need for this is a defined reporting regime. In practical terms, this really means moving beyond purely publishing data in annual reports on company websites or in non-machine readable formats, and ensuring that objective reporting rather than subjective, which is too often the case, is consistently applied. It needs to have standards. It means the adoption of standardized, reliable, consistent machine readable data available through APIs and accessible through a well-governed trust framework, the type of participant management system that's been developed for open banking and for open energy. It has already been achieved and it already exists. It just needs to be translated so that it can be applied across other sectors. If we can get to this, it would really revolutionize financial decision making. Because if you have access to this data, then you have the insight and then you have the advantage. You can make the right decisions. And this type of financial decision making can be a major lever of change for a transition to a fully green economy. And it can also stimulate widespread economic growth in the services that are providing solutions, consuming this data, and helping us to transition from a fossil fuel driven energy system to a much cleaner, sustainable system. Decision makers using data could, by having access to the right data in this standardized form, be much better placed to understand their exposure to climate risk. They would be able to de-risk, remove much of the systemic risk that already applies. And then they can understand the consequences that may come from the type of raised temperatures, more frequent extreme weather events that we're seeing, and those associated systemic threats. And institutions that can really demonstrate that they understand the climate change risk and have adopted these type of mitigating practices or strategies as a result will actually achieve a competitive advantage through greater certainty and lower overall risk in the investments that they make and the initiatives they do. So remove the risk, improve the certainty, you can be more confident on the type of return that you're going to get. So it makes common sense from a financial perspective. And then that in turn can unlock funds from ESG sources, that's environmental, social and governance sources. The type of funding that actually right now I understand has more capital available than opportunities to invest, people with money who want to see it applied in the right way. And this can happen because the impact of any investment that's made can be much clearer and the risk much better understood and priced for if the data is available, if this allows the types of insights and analysis that we're looking for. And that in turn will drive a transfer of capital from poor practices to good practices. So we can see an end-to-end drive from the data itself becoming available to the type of outcomes we're looking for, where we can really start to address some of the major environmental issues that we see across the globe today. So what do we need to do to make this real? So, of course, we came into this thinking about, well, how can we create a real change? And we think the way to do this is to really influence the policymakers. We started by asking, well, what do governments, what do treasuries, what do regulators, and what do industry really need to do in order to achieve this? And we really believe that governments should provide the type of top-down policy and regulatory framework that maximizes the potential for data to solve our problems and to realize the green growth that we want to see. This is already being seen to happen organically, sector by sector. It's not like it's not happening. It actually is happening. However, if we could implement a common standard for data sharing, have the kind of infrastructure that really allowed this to be done at scale, securely, and managed in a way that breeds trust in data sharing, then we believe that would actually uncork the potential that exists. It would allow data sharing at a scale way beyond the one that we see at the moment. And that in turn, and the insight and information that you can derive from that will then result in accelerated growth, both for businesses and for the green economy overall. So this can be a really huge economic and environmental driver. But to get to that point, first of all, we need to see that we have the right kind of legal and regulatory framework. That's going to be the kind of the base case for all of this stuff. We need to be in a situation where the environment really encourages organizations to share and consume data. there has to be, I think, a bit of carrot as well as stick around this. There need to be real clear benefits to industry, to governments, to invest the money that is going to make this happen. But there also needs to be, from the experience we've seen with the financial services sector and energy, a degree of regulatory intervention to get to that. Then we need to think about promoting investment in the type of infrastructure that we require here. And we'll need to think about mandating some of the key aspects around this to create the standard, the essential data that we require, the taxonomies, the standards and the governance around all of this. There needs to be a rule book for all of this stuff. We can learn from the work that's already been done in open energy and open banking. That's perfectly possible to do. It just takes some application. Ultimately, what we really need is for countries to start to introduce what I call national data infrastructure that allows data to be shared at scale across sectors and to be really interoperable, so that you can start to encourage the kind of creativity that really comes from particularly the private sector and from the academic world. And what kind of policy stuff do we think would really work? Well, I've already alluded to it. There is massive amount of leverage in the financial sector, making funds more attractive and really helping to address the systemic risk that I mentioned a moment ago. There's a clear financial case for doing that. We could see things like tax incentives around opening up data. We could probably see targeted government spending and grants that start to drive some of this stuff. Certainly, we could see things like regional incentives and investment. So for example, there is in the northeast of England a pocket of expertise really starting to develop around electric vehicle manufacturing, and the local university, the University of Newcastle, is already closely involved in that. And you see industrial and academic partnerships starting to develop there. We could imagine that there would be more green economy challenges, like the one that really promoted the development of open energy, targeted at solving priority issues and getting good brains working to think about the type of things that we need to do and providing the type of data that will be required to solve some of these issues. I see a huge future in the use of digital twins. So that's a digital representation of the real world and being able to simulate the effects we have in the real world. There's a huge amount of work. For example, the Centre for Digital Built Britain, that really is looking at how you can develop a systems approach and understand how implementing change in one area can have benefit across other areas. So for example, thinking about things in a holistic way. If you start to introduce low carbon technology in an area as a way of decarbonizing, at the same time, you'll also be reducing pollution, so reducing the amount of particulates in the air, for example, and that's a good thing. But also that means that you're going to have a knock-on impact on the health of the local community, which in turn means that you're probably going to see fewer sick days. So you can start to join the dots with this and start to see how systems thinking can really start to unlock benefits which go far more broadly than just the pure direct impact that you're seeking to have. You can really join the dots all the way across there. And then I can think that there's actually a massive opportunity to harness the power of government, industry, and universities. I mentioned the University of Newcastle. It would be remiss of me not to mention the fantastic work that's been done in Scotland at the University of Edinburgh, where the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence is really doing exactly that, with huge partners, banks like the Royal Bank of Scotland, the University of Edinburgh, the Financial Data, F-Data, Trade Association, all leaning in to work together to provide the kind of facilities that allow the fintech sector to test and learn and develop the right type of solutions. And that could be applied across across other sectors. Energy sector, agricultural, water, you name it. These type of things could be done in pockets, harnessing this power of the partnership between universities and industry, and government can play a role in stimulating that type of activity, making sure, for example, that the algorithms that are run to provide solutions function the way that we expect them to do, and that there is a way of making sure that what we want to achieve is actually what we achieve by using this data intelligently. So plenty of things that we can be doing. And I think we're in the very early stages of seeing many of these things start to come to pass. And I would urge you to go away and just think about some of the things that we've talked about today. We've started the ball rolling here, and I hope really that's given you some food for thought. Now, please feel free to reach out to me or to explore for yourself by clicking on the links here. So open banking is easy to find out about. My colleagues at Icebreaker One and icebreaker1.org, you'll find a lot there about the work that's been done on open energy. That's all been published. The policy there is a great one, by the way. Everything is very transparent. It's all searchable. All the work that's been done around that can be found, and some very useful videos and webinars and so on that you can listen to as well. So please do go and find out for yourself. Look into this. It's something that's happening. I think there's huge potential, and I'd just like to thank you for listening to me on this session. Thank you.